Hi, I'm Sarah Williams and I'm a sport and performance psychologist at the University of Birmingham. And my research focuses on stress, and particularly what might influence how we see stress. Do we see it positively or do we see it negatively? And what might that positive or negative influence do to us as an individual? And importantly, how can we teach people to see stress more positively so that we can gain the benefits from it? So I first became interested in this area of research based on my own experiences playing sport. So I played a lot of sport growing up, and I realised that often in those competitive situations I would get feelings of stress. But sometimes I would play well despite feeling stress, and that stress would even enhance my performance. Whereas other times I might be experiencing similar symptoms of stress but not play so well. And that really got me thinking, why in certain situations did I perform well when I was stressed, but in other situations I didn't? And that's what really drove my area of research, of trying to understand what might influence stress being seen as good compared to a bad thing, and how can we harness stress so it can enhance our performance in whatever we do. And I'm now going to answer some of your questions about stress. First up, Flyers Harborne has asked, how do we manage game day stress, particularly during a tournament when players are tired? Yeah, that's a good question, because if we think about tournaments when we're asked to play in a lot of competitive matches, we can often get very, very fatigued after those matches. One of the issues with stress is it can also make us feel quite tired at times, because if we think about the stress response, our heart is beating faster, we're really switched on, we're really, really focused. So my advice here would be that in between games of a tournament, particularly if there's a long duration, the first thing you want to do is, first of all, focus on something else. Have some of that downtime, whether it's a Sudoku puzzle, listening to music, maybe just chatting to your teammates. So try and put that next competition, that next match out of your mind. Once that match then comes closer, that's when you can start thinking about it. So if you've played 2 or 3 games, you might be feeling quite tired, but when you start focusing and thinking about that upcoming event, what's going to happen is that will automatically generate more of a stress response for you. Competition is a form of stress. Our heart starts beating more, we start thinking about things, we start getting a bit more concerned maybe about it. And what we can do is we can feed off that. That's our body's way of telling us it's starting to get ready, and automatically it psychs us up a bit more, it makes us more alert, more prepared to perform. So in tournaments, using that stress can be really beneficial to help us prevent feeling tired when we then go in to play the next match. Okay, so this question is from Beck_Lockwood, who says, children seem to suffer the effects of stress more intensely than ever before. Are there particular techniques that would help them harness stress to improve their well-being? So one of the key things, first of all, is to teach them the benefits of stress. So often when they feel stressed, they might be experiencing certain sensations in their body physiologically, like their heart rate, or feeling sweaty palms, feeling like they need a drink, they might feel a bit sick, they might feel very anxious about something. A key thing to do here is to remind them that that is their body's way of preparing them to perform to the best of their ability. So if they have an upcoming exam and maybe a few days beforehand they're starting to get those nerves, remind them that that's their body getting ready to perform well in that exam. What that can do is that can help them accept those responses, and rather than panicking when they start to experience those elevations, they experience them and they actually think more positively about them and think, yes, I'm starting to prepare, this is going to go well. And that can just help them go into that exam or whatever it is that they're feeling stressed about in a much more positive frame of mind. Now we can use other techniques with them as well. So things like using imagery or visualization can really go a long way in helping them when they might be feeling slightly hesitant about upcoming events. So by simply helping them imagine themselves in that situation, whether it's an exam or a sporting competition, imagining themselves feeling those elevations of stress, but seeing themselves performing well and maybe hearing people cheering them on or being able to feel really positively in that moment. When they then come to experience that moment, they're much more likely to feel more positive about it because they've already experienced it in their mind. Okay, now Tara_Kane says, my job is very public facing, so I feel a great deal of stress constantly. I sort of thrive off it, but can it be damaging to me? I mean, in the long term. That's a great question. It's a really nice example of how stress can be positive. So you can see here she's talking about thriving off that stress. So stress isn't always a bad thing, and it can sometimes be really beneficial for us. If we think about stress, there are different types. So we have what we call acute stress, which is more short short term. So maybe it's an upcoming sporting competition or a presentation at work or an exam. But we might also have this more long term, or what we sometimes refer to as chronic stress. So that might be something like financial difficulties, or maybe we've had a family bereavement. So that stress is much more longer term rather than just being in the lead up to an important competition. We need to do more research to try and work out really how we can harness stress to the best of its ability. But what we tend to think at the moment is that more short-term stress can be more easily seen to be more positive, because it's our body's way, or it's our way of telling our body that we're preparing to perform well. Whereas those more long-term stressors, sometimes we might be able to argue and say, what are the benefits of feeling stress of a family bereavement? It's much harder to try and understand the positive effects of that. But like I say, we do need to do much more research in this to try and understand how we can harness stress, or how we can prevent it being more debilitative if it is a more longer term stress. Okay, so Claire Belkady says, can stress help me run a sub 2 hour half marathon again, please? Well, if we think about performance under pressure and we think about competitions, competition is a form of stress. One of the best things I tend to say to athletes is that, if you're thinking about world records, when are they ever broken at training? They're not. They're always broken, often in the finals of the competition, when it really, really counts. With all types of sport, whether it's running or whether it's competing in other levels, there are so many things that athletes will do to make sure that they're performing at the best of their ability. They will follow an excellent training plan. They will make sure that they have the best sporting equipment. They will make sure they've had the right amount of sleep the night before. The key thing with sports and performing to the best of our abilities is often that on-the-day competition and how we as an individual process that. Often when we're racing, compared to if we may be training, we can run that little bit faster because we are experiencing those responses to stress in that moment of competition that we wouldn't naturally respond to, or we wouldn't naturally experience in a training run. So I would say absolutely can stress help you run that sub 2 hour half marathon. The key is to make sure you've done everything else right so that you're in the best shape when you go into that competition. And then on the day, use those feelings of stress, use those elevations in heart rate, those nerves, that anticipation, that excitement to really fuel your performance and make sure that you're able to run that little bit quicker and to get that slightly quicker time. Okay, our next question is from Caroline Durbin, and she asks, how can we recognise the difference between healthy stress and unhealthy stress? And that's interesting because if we think about the responses that we get when we feel stressed, often there isn't really much difference. So it's very hard to recognise from an outside point of view the difference between healthy and unhealthy stress. So if someone's stressed, they often feel those elevations in their physiology, like their heart rate, maybe they're feeling sweaty palmed, maybe they've got that dry throat. Nerves-wise, they might have that sort of slightly feelings of anxiety or those concerns. Similarly, if they're also feeling stress as a good thing, they're often likely to experience the same things. So experiencing those elevations in heart rate, experiencing those sweaty palms, that dry mouth, feeling those slight levels of anxiousness or concern. So actually the responses we get when stress is seen as being positive or negative can often be really, really similar. The key thing between them is how we perceive those responses. So do we see those responses as being something that's going to be helpful for us, that's going to get us in the right frame of mind to perform to the best of our abilities? Or do we panic when we experience those sensations and worry that that's going to impede our performance so that it's very, very detrimental to us? And so very much whether stress is seen as being positive or negative can often come down to that individual and how they perceive the responses they experience. Okay, so our next question from Mighty Pinks Ones. How can we support our teammates when they're feeling stressed? This is an interesting one because this is something that I've experienced playing team sports all my life. Sometimes you might get a teammate that suddenly says to you one day before a competition, maybe on the morning of the competition, maybe a few minutes before it's about to start, I'm feeling a bit nervous, or I'm feeling a bit stressed today. Something doesn't quite feel right. And often if we think about it, what we tend to do if somebody says that to us is we immediately think that stress isn't a good thing. So our initial response, or our knee-jerk response, tends to be, don't worry, you'll be absolutely fine, it's okay, try not to be nervous. And what that can do is that can often make the person feel even worse because they're suddenly thinking, I shouldn't be feeling nervous, I need to try and suppress these nerves that I'm experiencing. So what I tend to do when somebody turns around to me and says to me, I'm feeling a bit nervous today, I'm a bit worried about what's going to happen, is I'll immediately try and get them to think about that stress in a more positive way. So my instinct or my response to them is always, that's not nerves, that's nothing to worry about, that's not stress. That's your body telling you that you're ready to perform today. So maybe it might be a more important competition, maybe it's a knockout game, or maybe it's a relegation battle, and all of a sudden that player is experiencing responses that they wouldn't normally get. And what I tell them is, It's because today's more important. Your body is very much preparing you today to perform even better than you're normally capable of, because it knows the importance of this event and it knows the importance of you performing really well. And what I found is by simply telling people that, it immediately changes how they perceive the responses they're experiencing. It can help them really thrive off it rather than panicking and worrying that they might not do as well. So we need to change how our teammates experience stress, and that could really help them perform better in those moments of competition. Okay, our next question from M_peers24. How do I prevent myself from feeling too overwhelmed by stress? Or is there a way I can harness this to aid my performance? That's a great question, and there absolutely is a way that you can prevent yourself feeling too overwhelmed, and it all comes down to your perceptions of those responses to stress. So when you get stressed, you will experience certain physiological and psychological sensations. So it might be those negative concerns, those elevations in your heart rate, or perhaps you don't want to eat, you might feel a little bit sick, a little bit worried. The key that you need to do there is you need to remind yourself that those responses are your body's way of preparing you. So your body knows that something might be coming up. Maybe it's an exam, maybe it's a job interview, maybe it's an important competition. And your body knows that that's an important event and it wants you to do really well in it. So it's your body's way of preparing itself. So the elevations in heart rate, for example, are to deliver blood to your brain and to your muscles so that you can perform well, either cognitively, making sure you remember the correct answers in an exam, for example, or maybe from a motor performance point of view, supplying your muscles with oxygen so that you can run that bit quicker, for example, in a competition. So by simply reminding yourself that that's what's happening in your body is getting itself ready to perform, that can help prevent you feeling overwhelmed. So see those responses as a positive thing rather than a negative thing, and automatically that will help you to not be overwhelmed by them. By doing that, that's simply going to aid your performance, because rather than getting worried about those responses, you can then just use those responses to catapult you to that improved standard to what you would do normally if you were worried about those responses. Okay, so this question is from Thomas Badger, and he says, what practical application does your research have? Can harnessing stress be the difference between a gold and a silver medal? Well, one of the things I love most about my research is that I feel it has huge practical applications. So many people are stressed, whether it's athletes or people in the workplace. Nowadays we all experience stress. And because my research focuses on how to help people see stress more positively and how to use certain techniques to help them see that stress more positively, I feel it can have a huge beneficial effect on all types of people to help improve their health, their performance, but really importantly also their well-being. If we think about stress in terms of, can harnessing it be the difference between a gold and a silver medal, I would say it absolutely can be. And not just between the difference between a gold medal and a silver medal, but also the difference between winning a gold medal and perhaps not even winning a medal at all. If we think about elite athletes, they put in so many hours of dedicated work to ensure that they are performing to the best of their ability. So they follow rigorous training plans, they have the best coaches, they use the best sporting equipment, they follow really, really strict diets to make sure that everything they've got going for them is going to help them perform to the best of their ability. So because of all this, the only thing really left to ensure or to give them the edge comes down to their psychology, and it comes down to how they're able to deal with the pressure of competition. So competition being a form of stress, those athletes that can harness that stress, those responses that they experience during the competition, and use it to their advantage are going to do better than those that don't necessarily. And if we're thinking about elite sport, often it can come down to tenths of a second, the difference between a gold and a silver medal. So if we can help athletes harness that stress to give them that tiny extra edge, it's likely to make the difference and to help them be more successful in their sport. Okay, so VJ Pal says, what's the right balance of stress? How much should I be feeling and how strongly should I be feeling stressed? Thanks. The key thing that we need to do when we're wanting to harness that stress and use it in a positive way is think about, for us, what sort of levels of stress are best for us. Do we need to feel a little bit more pumped up, a little bit more adrenaline? If we think about sport, the different types of sport, things like dart throwing and golf putting, those athletes tend to feel a little bit of elevations of stress, but not as much as maybe power lifters or boxers, when these guys tend to pump themselves up even more. So thinking about what it is that we're doing can really help us identify the elevations of stress that will be best for us. And also as an individual, trying to work out what sort of level helps us get into the right frame of mind to feel prepared without feeling too overwhelmed. But I would say most importantly, it's about reminding ourselves that any stress we experience is a good thing. It's our body's way of preparing us to make sure that we are switched on, that we are focused, and that we are ready to perform to the best of our ability. And as long as we can do that, often what we find is that any stress we experience can be a more positive thing. Okay, that's all the questions for today. I found that really enjoyable, and I hope that you found it really useful and informative. And importantly, remember that when you're feeling stressed in future, remind yourself that that's your body's way of telling you it's getting ready to perform. So make sure you use that stress to enhance your performance. And remember to go to our website for more game-changing research.